Okay, everybody. I know you've got your mouths full, which should make it easier for me to get quiet in the room. Thank you. I didn't bring my glass. We do have a couple of things left to do, so don't stop eating. But we do have one more speaker for you, and I am delighted to bring Brian Hancock up to the stage to help us link several of our grand challenges together. Last year, when the Academy released our No Time to Wait Part 2 report, Brian was the keynote speaker and sharing with us how the future of work was going to make the changes we recommended to government's civil service absolutely imperative if we were to have any hope of creating a workforce that could effectively deliver government programs. I am really pleased to welcome Brian back today to share with us McKinsey's latest reporting on the future of work in America. As we think about some of our grand challenges, like connecting individuals to meaningful work, fostering social equity, building resilient communities, and even developing new approaches to public engagement and governance, I think the insights that Brian's going to give us can really give us a common place to start. So Brian, we're so pleased to have you join us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. And one of the things that I'm particularly excited about, as Terry said, a lot of our research pulls against a number of the grand challenges. So as we go through today, I'll probably focus most on connecting individuals to work and building resilient communities. Because the way we started our research, so McKinsey has a think tank, the McKinsey Global Institute, that 3 years started looking at what the future of work was going to be. Looked at all 800 plus occupations, took that down to the task level, looked and said, okay, at that level, what's automatable? We'll share a little bit of the high levels of that research. But then the question became, so what does that mean to people and communities? Who is this going to disproportionately affect? And how is that going to be different in communities across the country? Detroit looks different than Seattle. Coahoma County, Mississippi looks different than Fairfax County, Virginia. And really understanding those differences mean that communities need different responses. And there's a role of the public sector along with the social sector and private sector in coming together in those areas. So in the back half of the research that we'll share today, talk a bit about that building resilient communities and how we've broken down the communities in our country into a number of different segments, each with their own challenges. So just a quick overview. I'm sure many of you are deeply familiar with the technology systems that underline automation and AI. Here are 5 of examples. Computer vision, these are things like facial recognition programs. Natural language processing, so a forklift driver in a warehouse that has a breakdown of the forklift can actually just call in the ticket by talking into his walkie-talkie. Hey, this is Brian. Forklift broke, I think it's this problem, and they will know, and that will translate into a ticket without having to walk back, write it out. Work, cognitive agents like chatbots, robotics and autonomous vehicles, and then machine learning and deep learning. These can take a number of different forms. One in the private sector that is taking off is actually using machine learning to read contracts. So a number of financial institutions, a key part of what they have to do is, go through document review. And the machines can actually learn now, okay, what is just a typo that we can fix and what needs to be flagged to another individual. So I talked about how we looked at the 800 occupations, broke it down to the task level to see what the impact of automation would be. What we found is very, very few occupations can be 100% automated. There are very few jobs where you can literally take out the human and put in the robot. But there are 60% of occupations are 30% or more automatable. What that means is work is going to transform. It's not, and you need to reaggregate tasks. It's as much an org design question. How does work get reaggregated in the new era as it is a what are we going to do to replace the robot? So, linking it back to the challenges, as you think about modernizing and reinvigorating the public service or making government AI ready, it's doing this in a world where it's not automation coming and taking a job one for one, but needing to rethink how tasks get aggregated and then how we manage around it. Moving to the impact on individuals. What is happening with individuals? By 2030, we think 39 million jobs can be displaced. Now, we think there is growth. This is looking at the jobs lost side. Jobs will be gained in the economy as they grow. They'll be in different areas. What this tees up is the reskilling challenge and the challenge of matching people who are displaced from work to what the new jobs are. So when we looked at what occupations we thought were going to be most impacted, 4 occupations represent over 50% of the impact. Office support, food services, production work, and customer service and sales like call centers. It's no accident that those are also some of the largest occupations in the economy. Also, disproportionately folks without a college degree. And so if you look at the shading here, the darker colors represent a higher percentage of workers without a college degree. So the less educated folks are the ones that have higher impact. One thing you might notice on this slide is the transportation services box is relatively small. Transportation services occupations include drivers, it includes material movers, it includes folks that support those and are related in there. So it could include specific mechanics, could also include some kind of rail support work, et cetera. That box is relatively small, and people always ask, well, what about trucks and autonomous vehicles? Isn't that going to affect it? And it may in the long run. But what we see is, given the existing investment in the current trucking fleet, given the state of regulation, given where things are, we think there will be experimentation. We think there will be some impacts, but at least through 2030, a number of those, trucking jobs are still going to be around. And in fact, today, my private sector clients say that getting qualified truckers is among the hardest things that they do. It is one of the areas that they have the greatest skill shortage. So how does this link up by demographic group? Well, as we talked about on the prior page, the less educated are disproportionately hit. So there's a 4 times higher displacement rate for workers with a high school diploma or less. Close to 12 million Hispanic and African Americans. The Latinos and Latinas are the group with the highest impact, about 25% displacement. Young workers are also impacted as automation takes the more routine tasks and is able to automate the more routine tasks, whether that's in a factory or in a retail store or in other contexts. What you're taking away is often the entry level to the next job, to the career ladder. So this is a double challenge. One part of the challenge of connecting individuals to meaningful work here is, how do you get on that first rung of the ladder? If all of a sudden those first rungs have been eliminated, and then second, now we do have not just a long-term career problem for the folks, but a very near-term question on what to do. And then workers age 50 and above, they're not disproportionately impacted here, but it's not to say that that's not still a big number. 11.5 million workers age 50 and above that are currently in jobs that would be automated. This is the FTE equivalent of those. So real impacts across various segments, each of which have different challenges and potentially different solutions. So what about women? Women represent actually a lower than 50% share of job displacements, and jobs where women are represent a disproportionate job growth. A lot of this is driven by healthcare, but there are other occupations as well. And so when some folks look at this, they say, okay, so women are fine. What we have to worry about is the men. But we published a report that actually said, hey, for the women that are impacted, we need to doubly think about the social networks that they have, the connectivity, the ways of getting them, because there may be challenges just in that setup that we need to take a closer look at as well. So, how do we treat, even though women may not be disproportionately impacted, how do we make sure that they're able to make the transitions and that we invest behind that is also a challenge. So in the decade ahead, I talked a little bit about, we don't think that this is going to relate or result in a large jobless economy. Jobs will be gained, just as jobs are being lost. But what we have to worry about is the transition. So where are jobs going to be gained? Health professionals, STEM, creatives, management, education and workforce training. And where are jobs going to be growing slower than the average or even declining? Things like property maintenance and agriculture, builders, food service and office support, some of the things from the prior page. So part of the challenge here is how do we get workers that are in occupations on the right-hand side of the page trained up to the left-hand side? Or how do we think about some of the broader transitions in the economy so that even if it's not moving from right to left, that net we end up getting the people to fill the jobs that are growing on the left-hand side, and we're figuring out what to do for the folks on the right. As we look at a skill level, the skill mix is going to change. Physical and manual skills will still be important in the economy. As the economy grows, some of our projections do talk about the need for investing in infrastructure, replacing infrastructure. That does take people. So some of the public investment there will actually absorb some of the folks with physical and manual skills. Basic cognitive skills, things like data entry, we see the greatest reduction in hours because computers can do that quite easily at this point. Higher cognitive skills, social and emotional skills, and technological skills all increase. One of my colleagues says, when the dull and the dangerous jobs are automated, what's left is what makes us really the higher cognitive, the social and emotional, and then the technology to make sure that all of it runs. Okay, so that's a quick tour of the impact of automation on people. But how does this link to resilient communities? So we did a bit of research. So what we did is we took all 3,150-ish counties in the US, and we had 42 variables. And those variables included from automation potential to socioeconomic factors like Gini coefficient to where it sits on the rural-urban spectrum to GDP per capita to industry mix to presence of R1 research institutions. So a broad range that was really meant to say how vibrant is the community, what trajectory is it on, and will they have the resilience and the innovation to come back from a punch, or are they going to be more challenged coming out? And we recognize that this is not an urban versus rural debate, because some rural communities are actually doing really well, or some non-big city communities are doing really well. So it's not a urban versus rural debate. It's not a coast versus flyover country. There really is nuance at the individual level. So this is what our segmentation looked like. 13 distinct community archetypes. The mega cities and high growth hubs are dynamic centers that are where a disproportionate amount of job growth is going to be going forward. You have some niche cities that aren't big cities but are growing. So these are places like Provo, Utah, or Bentonville, Arkansas, where there is a real economic dynamism, where they are growing, and where there is good signs of resilience. Silver cities where retirees are moving are also looking healthy and good, as are college-centric towns. They really pop up across the landscape as we look. When we start to go to segments like the mixed middle, these are places that aren't growing as fast, but are treading water. They're not what you would say, in decline, but they're not growing as fast, and they're not net attracting as many people as the top. And then we have the low growth and rural areas. And here you start to see some distinctions, even in this group, between Americana and distressed Americana. So let me pick on those two as examples. If you look at the map, that orangish color is what we call distressed Americana. Covers a lot of the geography, not as much in population, but it covers a lot of the geography of the country. And what we recognized in splitting out Americana from distressed Americana are both of those segments have not recovered their employment since the recession. But distressed Americana has even lower per capita GDP, even lower educational attainment, even higher representation of ethnic minorities. It looks different in a number of ways that really lets you kind of pull out. The other thing that we thought was interesting in this view is it also let us compare communities that you wouldn't naturally think you could compare. So again, taking distressed Americana, if you squint, you can look at where the Appalachian Regional Commission or the Mississippi Delta, you can see the counties that are covered there, covered here in distressed Americana. But you also see, large swaths of New Mexico. You see parts of Michigan, the upper part of the mid of Michigan. And so one of the things we think is interesting here is communities that may be geographically in different locations. The Northeast Kingdom of Vermont may be able to learn something from Coahoma County, Mississippi, and vice versa, in a way that is actually different than what the Northeast Kingdom could learn from another more thriving community within the state of Vermont. So we think that this does open the way to think about information sharing, collaboration, thinking about solutions in a way that more fits the economics and the challenge of the community than just what state it fits in or where it is on the rural-urban continuum. So while all of those archetypes saw employment decline during the recession, the job gains during recovery have been concentrated in the urban areas. So you see the biggest growth in the high-growth hubs, small powerhouses, and the mega cities. You see that our trailing cities, places like Flint, Michigan, Americana, and distressed Americana have either barely gotten back to the employment levels, or in the case of distressed Americana, not gotten back at all post the recession. So when we play that forward, we think 60% of net job creation is going to be in 25 urban areas. If you just took what the expected growth would be based on current population, that compares to about 47%. So 47% would be the expected as just population, 60% of net job growth is what we see in 25 communities. And if you look at the light gray on the map, that's where we're projecting job decline through 2030. So when we're thinking about resilient communities and connecting individuals to meaningful work, in those communities that are having job decline, it's a different challenge than the communities that are robust. In the communities that are robust, some of the things outlined in the description of the Grand Challenge make a lot of sense. Hey, how do we think about retraining? How do we think about physically connecting people to opportunity? Because these are areas that are growing, that need workers, and it can be about connecting people to opportunity in those communities. In some of these other areas where jobs aren't growing, it's a bit of a different challenge. Yes, you have to still connect, get the right skills, make it relevant, but there's an additional challenge because the jobs may not be in that community. So what we thought we'd do here is just pull out Michigan as an example. When you look at Michigan, geographically, most of the state are counties that have job loss between now and 2030. And then even within the state, you see cities with different profiles. So Ann Arbor is the fastest growing. It's a college town. It's a vibrant town. There's innovation. Patent creation is good. It is a vibrant and growing community, and we see that net job growth of 13% there. Grand Rapids exemplifies our America's Makers segment. It has job growth at or just above the average of what we think will happen nationally. They've got a good, robust manufacturing base, some Fortune 500 company presence. Interesting. Detroit is actually a tale of two cities. If you look at Detroit, we actually have that as a metro area. The northern parts of Detroit, Oakland County, actually growing quite well. The core Detroit is not. You average it out across the MSA, and you end up with net job growth about 5%, which puts it in the stable categories. That's less than what the national average will be, but still some growth. And then Flint is an example of a trailing city, net job growth of 3%. So why do I talk through at this level? As folks are thinking about how to create solutions, there's not one national solution or even one state solution. If you look at the solutions that are needed within Michigan and the innovation that is needed, it is different by type of community. And so how do we think about creating the dialogues within the communities and sharing lessons across similarly situated communities across the country, to pull out what's working, to think about how to drive innovation, and to help make the transitions. So as you all have discussed over the past few days, there are a few imperatives in building a brighter future of work. One is developing the workforce of the future. How do we really create the training programs for mid-career workers, create the lifelong learning mindsets, create the opportunities for folks to have the skills that are needed in the future, and then how do we connect those workers to opportunity? That can be connecting through labor market transparency, things like credentials that more easily signal, hey, I've got this skill. It can also be literally connecting people with work. As you look at the urban periphery as a segment, do we have good transportation to the urban core? As jobs in the urban periphery get automated and opportunities are shifting to the core, hey, is there a way to get people from A to B? As you are looking at some of the other segments, what's the underlying economic development story? How are we going to get job creation going? How are we going to think about spurring demand for jobs? And then how do we think more broadly about supporting workers in transition? When you look at this picture, does that create more momentum behind ideas like lump sum unemployment? Hey, if you've got to move, if you do that, or if you've got to take on a training burden, do ideas like that start to make sense? We don't take a position on some of those kinds of public policy questions, but we think that some of the ideas that are out there are interesting as we think through what different forms of support may be required given the nature of the challenge. And so I'll end with just a quick overview of how we see some of those challenges differ by communities. In the urban core, affordable housing is a challenge. In San Francisco, how do we actually get people in San Francisco to be able to be medical assistants? An entry-level allied health profession. How do we provide job training for low-income workers, and how do we link, once trained, those workers with opportunity? Because even within the urban core, there are segments neighborhood by neighborhood, and how do you connect the neighborhoods with less opportunity to those with more? In the urban periphery, again, attracting investment and linking education programs to the urban employers are keys. Improving links with transportation links with the core city. Another thing we're seeing in the urban periphery is actually turning it from feeling like suburbia to feeling like a downtown, to feeling like it's a place that someone wants to be. And creating that sense of place can be one of the things that attracts investment into the community. Hey, that looks interesting. It's got good transportation links into the core city, and it feels like a vibrant, thriving, walkable downtown. In the niche cities, these are the small powerhouses, the silver cities, the college-centric towns. These are places of growth, and and it's about how do we continue. And then how do we address some of the specific challenges by segment? So in silver cities, where we have a disproportionate number of retirees, the challenge here is actually, hey, enough people are coming, how do we get the workers to support the retirees? In the college towns, there's an opportunity to keep even more of that talent in the town and addressing some of the poverty issues that exist in a number of those. In the mixed middle and low growth in rural areas, a lot of these rely on economic growth. How do we think about it from in the mixed middle, you've got a little bit more to start with. So thinking of the sector-specific plans and, hey, if we've got some really high talent work and high talent workers that are being displaced, how do we think about spurring economic development around that scarce talent so that they stay here instead of move somewhere else? In the low growth and rural areas, it's a little bit of a different story. There's a little bit less to build on. And so thinking a little bit more creatively. One of the things that in the rural areas, particularly some of the distressed Americana, I mentioned the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, they've invested in ecotourism. So the top mountain biking destination in the United States is the Kingdom Trails in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. And that is a very, that's a distressed community. But they looked at what they had and said, hey, if you all think mountain biking can do it, let's go in and let's try. And that's been a little bit of an economic engine. So it's thinking creatively. It wasn't about the next factory. It was about thinking about the assets they had in ecotourism, turned out to be one. And then finally, in these communities, how do we make sure that you've got the right high school, K through 12 education so that those folks have the opportunity either for jobs that do exist in that community or ones that are outside. So with that, and here are just some examples of cities that have collaborated. Reno, after the recession, was in not great shape, and they have turned into, with Tesla and now with others, given their proximity to Silicon Valley and some very deliberate planning, have now turned that into one of our small powerhouses. So Reno is a city where some deliberate planning can make a difference.
Thank you. This is a wonderful presentation. My name is Brian Collins. I'm with the National Commission on Service. My question is, I'll give some context. Many of my friends increasingly do not live where they work. They either have joined organizations that do not have any physical permanent office, or they work for an organization where they used to be in San Francisco with Cisco or whatever, but now they live in Portland or Bend and they work from home. I'm wondering how trends toward remote work and those kinds, or not even having a physical office, how does that affect this analysis?
So it's an excellent question. I think what the examples of the places that you indicated of where people were moving were exciting other thriving communities and things that people were excited about. So there is a part of, how do you make those communities exciting? I think Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Vermont both have incentives for people who can do remote work and move to those locations. And it's an interesting program, so I'm not sure that the uptake has been huge, but they're interesting programs that are along those ways. But in some of our communities, there's not the broadband infrastructure to do remote work. And so on the more distressed areas, it's like, okay, even if we want that vision to be possible, there's some foundation and infrastructure that we need to begin. Yes?
Irving Williams. I take your point that the battle is going to be one community at a time. But thinking big picture, total number of jobs in our economy, you talked about the ones that are losing, the ones that are gaining. say at 2030, are we going to have as many jobs totally as we have now? And what about income, our salary levels?
So so our report is actually named Jobs Lost, Jobs Gained. So we do think that there will be actually net job growth between now and 2030, and that will be in some of the specific high growth sectors. So whether you're thinking about healthcare or thinking about the infrastructure needs that we have, we do see real.
How big? Because,
Sorry.
Yeah, how big?
Because the policy prescriptions, the policy prescriptions and all that government's going to have to make depends on how many more jobs are there going to be gained, or what's the net job gain? You see what I'm saying?
I do. So we think between now and 2030, I think the number is, we expect a 10% increase in total jobs between now and then. That's net of economic growth, net of the changes based on automation. But the challenge is, okay, where those new jobs are growing, we have to be able to connect people to that work. And so how do you actually think about, as large swaths of the economy are going through automation, how do you make the transitions? And some of those transitions may not be to occupations at similar or higher wage, as you think about, what's happening in as it rolls across the economy.
What about salary levels too?
I think that's an occupation by occupation question, and also community by community. If you're in a distressed Americana community, we think there's going to be less wage pressure. We think for the jobs that remain, there's not going to be pressure to raise those wages up. In very competitive markets in the urban areas, we think there may be more pressure there. We didn't do a detailed analysis of exactly. We didn't model out what we thought the impact on wages were going to be, but we did look at the occupation share and where that was going to go, and some of the mid-skill jobs that will be automated. It's not clear that the pathways for folks in those jobs are going to be pathways to jobs with equal or higher wage.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. Bill Eggers from Deloitte Center for Government Insights. I wanted to just get into the numbers just a little bit. And of course, the projections around automation range radically, as you know, from OECD, which is at 8%, and PwC is up at 40% or so of job loss. But especially with regard to, I was surprised to see the numbers on women versus men in terms of the impact. Certainly the last recession, men were more impacted, but a lot of the recent work I've seen has said that basically we think this wave of automation, women are going to be more impacted. From the Institute for Women Policy Research, they estimate 58% of workers in jobs at high risk of technological substitution will be women, who make up more than less than half of the employment population. And similar work from the New America Foundation recently came to similar conclusion.
The art in that is how you define at high risk occupation. So when you go and look at this percent of automatable activities, if you look at things that are, if you say an automatable activity, a high risk of automation, is 70% or more of the tasks are going to be automated, then you start to get things that look like stock clerks, travel agents, dental lab assistants, which are disproportionately women. When you take a broader view that says actually most jobs, let's not make the cutoff, because we're going to say that actually jobs are going to be reformed if it's 30% or if it's 70%, you get an answer that looks a little bit different in terms of what the impacts are going to be. And so, we went back and tried to square those analyses, and it all hinges on what you think is a highly automatable. And we think that whether it's highly automatable or not, in no job are you can just replace it with a robot, or in very, very few. And so that's where the difference in the numbers and the impact on women come from.
I don't know.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you, Harvey White, University of Delaware. I've used your work, and so thank you for the work. Your work in terms of transportation differs from some others. A lot of money is being placed into autonomously driven vehicles today.
Yep.
Why do you conclude that that's not going to be affected as drastically as some others forecast, particularly taxi drivers and even trucks going across the country? There are perceptions that because of the shortage that you've suggested, that there's going to be a move towards automation in that area.
I think there is going to be automation there. It's just a question of the adoption curve. And so when we look at it, we did the analysis in 2 steps. First, what is technically automatable? And when you look at technically automatable, absolutely, those are technically automatable jobs using existing technologies. But then when we look at our adoption scenarios, that's where you start to get into things that are around regulation, things around what other technologies have to be adopted with it. When you start to look at things like the installed base of capital that you already have, how likely is it that you invest on that? It's those things that made us, we still think there are 1.2 million full-time equivalent positions in transportation that will be eliminated between now and 2030. So it's not that we think there's no impact, but when we look at that overall, we say, that may be a 2030 to 2040, 2030 to 2050 curve to get it all together versus something between now and 2030. Thank you.
I know a lot of you do work in this space. The thing that I love about this report is how it takes it down to counties, and it gives public administrators really practical steps to think about how we integrate all of these for the benefit of resilient communities. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us today, Brian. All right, as we near the end of this conference, we have one more very important piece of business to do, and that is the presentation of the George Graham Award for Exceptional Service to the Academy. So I would like to invite Dr. Cy Murray up to this stage to present this year's Graham Award.
I thought it was going to be written on this computer up here. I have it here, and I'm going to have to read it, and therefore you're going to have to bear with me. In 2006, the National Academy of Public Administration created the George Graham Award for Exceptional Service to the Academy. This award, named for the National Academy's first president, recognizes those fellows who have made a sustained and extraordinary contribution toward the Academy becoming a stronger and more respected organization. I am honored to chair that committee of people who made a selection, but I want to recognize first the committee members. If you are here, just raise your hand. Committee members included David Chu, Mort Downey, Frank Fairbanks, Mary Hamilton, I've seen it around, and Jacqueline Rogers. And this year, I'm very pleased to announce that Blue Woodridge is our George Graham Award recipient. And I'd like for Blue to stand. Come up here with me. Now, even before becoming, you could just stand there and we're going to talk to you.
You always tell me what to do, right?
Even before he became a fellow, Blue was involved as an associate standing panel member and made presentations at the Academy's annual conference and at panel meetings. When the Academy was facing serious internal problems in 2009, he joined some compatriots in running for the board outside of the normal, regular nominating slate. That's the kind of guy that he is. His successful candidacy led to 6 years of strongly positive involvement that left Napa in a better position than it had been before his election and would have been without him. For years, Blue has been the driving force behind the Academy's involvement in social equity issues. Through presentations, committee work, panel leadership, and persistent reminders. He has been willing to work at all levels to foster this involvement and has done so much with both grace and strength. He has also been a major proponent of international involvement, including the development of the Africa Working Group as a subset of the International Standing Panel. He has been a willing member and leader of multiple special task forces and working groups, and always participates in Academy's activities willingly and voluntarily. During his 2 terms as a member of the Board of Directors, Blue served on the Executive Committee. He also spent 2 years on the Fellows Nominating Committee, 3 years on the Board Officers Nominating Committee, and for a year on the President-CEO Search Committee. When it was deemed necessary to cast a wider net for prospective board members and fellows, it was Blue who successfully chaired the membership committee for 4 years. He moved from being an associate member to being a regular member of the Social Equity Positioning Committee when he became a fellow in 2005. In addition, he has been an organizer of multiple events over the years, including the following activities: the Planning Committee, the 6th Annual Leadership Committee on Social Equity, and he has been on the Planning Committee for the Fall Social Equity Committee. He has convened, and he was a president for the model. He was a convener and a presenter for Models for Conducting Senior Management Development Sessions in African Countries that was led by Philip Rutledge, that some of you will remember. He was a panel convener and presenter at the state and local responses to the financial crisis, implementations of the memos to national leaders. He was a panel moderator for preparing an equity agenda for local governments. NAPA's fall meeting, he was a moderator and participated in panels. Now, in his professional role, Blue has worked with governments of multiple countries, where he acquired an expertise that has proved invaluable to the International Standing Panel and to the Africa Working Group, for which he was vice chair. He was also part of the expert advisory group for the Academy's effort on the Iraq Civil Service curriculum, as well as the Ronald H. Brown African Affairs series that dealt with leadership and governance in Africa, developing high-performance public administration to manage economic growth and social prosperity. By far, his greatest contribution have come as chair of the Standing Panel on Social Equity for 11 years. He kept the issue in the forefront of the board's consciousness, and he continually found engaging speakers to make standing panel meetings lively, interesting, and well-attended. He worked with the board chairs to find money to support the annual equity conferences, and he made the connections to find cities and universities to be hosts for the Equity Conference on an annual basis. Now, rather than being driven solely by social concerns, his commitment has been grounded in economic realities. At the 7th Annual Social Equity Conference, for an example, he presented Doing Well While Doing Good, the economic case for reducing social inequities. And at a Napa forum, he presented Framing the Issue, making the economic case as well as the social justice case. This interest in economic issues was also evident in his serving as an associate member of the project panel on integrating budget and planning for the FBI. More than any other member, Blue has represented the Academy's social equity concerns to outside constituencies. For an example, he made his presentation, Walking the Talk, the National Academy of Public Administration's contribution to social equity, to the 2010 ASPA Conference in California, the 2011 COMPA Conference in Texas, and the 2012 Social Equity Conference in Georgia. He made a similar presentation to the 2011 NASPA Conference in Missouri. In other words, Blue has consistently worked for the betterment of the Academy and the society at all levels. His energy, his moral courage, his dedication to social justice, and his success in changing attitudes for the better exemplify the principles on which the Academy was founded, and we believe he is more than worthy of being named this year's George Graham Award recipient.
This morning, I approached Caitlin out there at the desk, and looking pleadingly, I asked, was there going to be an opportunity for me to make some remarks? And she said yes, that she had fitted in some time. And I said, well, what should I talk about? And she said, no more than 5 minutes. But I'm so grateful. First of all, I do want to introduce my wife, Annie Woldridge, former Associate Provost at George Washington University. Annie was here, 14 years ago when people like Marilyn and B.J. Reed, I think he got in, I don't know how, but when we were all inducted as fellows of the Academy, and has been actively monitoring what we were doing at the National Academy and in the fellowship. About 3 weeks ago, Diane Disney called me and told me about the award, and but then she ran down the list of the names of the people that she had coerced into co-nominating me. And when I heard the names, some of which are previous award winners of the Graham Award and other outstanding members, I told her that she had ruined my life forever. Because when such outstanding members of the fellowship think that I'm deserving of this award, now I'm going to have to spend the rest of my life living up to it. I am deeply excited. This has been a time, I've just retired from VCU, and it's been a time in which I'm picking up some awards. Of course, as BJ says, by the time you're 90, you're bound to be recognized for something anyway. But this one is, of course, extremely important to me because it comes from my colleagues within the Academy. I believe that the Academy talked about, we talk about sustain, bringing about respectability to the Academy. I think that the Academy demonstrated that it was a thought leader when it created the Standing Panel on Social Equity in 2001. And oddly enough, my first involvement with the Academy goes back to 1975. When as a young assistant professor, I was hired by the National Training and Development Service, Enid around, but anyway, she will remember that organization, to run a curriculum development project funded by HUD. And one of the 15 tasks assigned to me by HUD was to come over to this young organization called the National Academy of Public Administration and negotiate a contract to evaluate that project. So I've been involved in the Academy. Well, I started out my involvement in the Academy in the fall of 1975. I had already been convinced by our good friend H. George Fredrickson in his 1971 article in Public Management, where he talked about the fact that as public administrators, we needed to develop a compensatory social ethic, that whenever we deviate from an equal distribution of government services and goods, we should do it so in a way that makes up for the inherent disadvantage of being poor, or I might add, being a minority or another disadvantaged group. And so when Phil Rutledge approached me at a NASPA conference, approached me in about 2002 or 3, and said that he was now chairing this group at the Academy dealing with social equity, and asking me and inviting me to come to the meetings as an associate member. Of course, I jumped at the opportunity. I believe that along with the development of the standing panel, the fact that in 2005, the year that some of us were inducted, the fact that the standing panel, the fact that the Academy developed a strategic plan, and goal 2 of that strategic plan was to recognize equity as being the 4th element, along with efficiency and effectiveness. And that I think I've got some evidence to suggest that led the growth of social equity concerns in our sister organizations like ASPA, certainly like NASPA. Now we have the grand challenges. And I'm delighted, of course, that fostering public social equity is listed there. And not only that, the observation that that social equity cuts across all of the other grand challenges. And as we move forward, working towards achieving the grand challenges, I'd like to bring up the words of another fellow who was elected, I think, back in the 80s, a young guy from the Middlebrook Conference, Professor Todd Laporte, or now Professor Todd Laporte. And he said something which has now become a kind of a North Star in my life. It's guiding and directing a lot of my efforts now, even at my advanced age. And I had dark hair when I first got involved with this. But Laporte laid out a normative a premise of public administration. And he says we have to recognize that the purpose of public organizations is the reduction of economic, social, and psychic suffering both within and without the organization, and the enhancement of human life. And I hope as we move towards implementing and achieving the grand challenges, that we will also always remember to strive towards that vision. And I'm looking forward to working with the fellowship and the Academy family in achieving that. So thank you very, very much. I know that knowing the fellowship as a member of or as a chair of the membership committee reasonably well, I know that so many of you deserve this award, but you ain't getting this one, okay?
So this is the end of our fall meeting. I'd like to thank our sponsors for all the support they gave us, the Napa staff for the great work that they did, everyone who was involved in one of the breakout sessions, and also I'd like to congratulate our new fellows. One of the things I like to tell new fellows is that it's never too early to become an active fellow. When you see a panel that you might be interested in, volunteer for it. If you have interest in the work of some of the standing panels, by all means, get involved with them. Feel free to give money to the Academy. We can always use an extra $1 or $2 or 10,000. So I encourage you to do that. And remind you that if you look at the current board of directors, there are several of us who have not been fellows for a long time. So new fellows can get involved, and this Academy welcomes your participation early and often. So please do get involved, and congratulations on your selection. And congratulations to Blue for an extremely well-deserved award. I just tweeted a picture of that and referred to you as a legendary Napa Fellow. And so congratulations, and thank you all for participating in this great meeting.